Alrighty, welcome everybody to Project and Portfolio 2. Congratulations on getting it this far in the degree. I know that these courses can be challenging, and this is definitely just the beginning. So, what we're going to be getting into here is simulating what it's like to be working in a level design studio. Right, you'll see that at the bottom of the slide there. Project and Portfolio 2, a Scraps level design studio. Right, so Scraps is going to be the game that we're all working on. Right, so part of this class and part of this learning environment is working on games that aren't your own ideas, right? So you're going to be creating a level that's within the Scraps game, right? Within the Scraps universe. So you're going to have control and you're going to be able to design certain things within the level, but you're not able to change and modify things about the game that is Scraps. Right, so it's going to be simulating what it's like to be working in that type of environment, in that industry where you're working on another person's ideas and creating levels for that game. All right, first and foremost, just getting into, about myself. My name is Andrew O'Connor. I'm the course director of this course. There you'll see my email and my Skype contact. You can also find that in my profile on FSO. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a game art graduate. I graduated from Full Sail in 2011, mostly specializing in environmental modeling, character rigging, animation, whether it be character animation or environmental pieces that are animated. I do enjoy texturing and level design, definitely my strengths. And there's just some of the projects that I work on. So a little bit about my career. Right out of school in 2011, I got some odds and ends jobs. Right, so Umbaga Timeshare, as an example, it was a timeshare company that wanted a character that was modeled and had for a fur system that was rigged to animate and could talk. Right, so they wanted to basically create a 10-second cutscene or a 10-second little commercial of this character dropping in from the top of the screen and falling on his butt, and then just saying a one line like, my name's Umbaga. Come check out what I did to timeshare. That's all they wanted him to say, right? So we got that character working. I created the rig and handed off to the rig to the animators and continued to troubleshoot and work with the rig and improve it as they were animating it and finished up that project. So that was just the very first job I got right out of school. It definitely something you'll notice wasn't a game job, but it was just something I could get my foot into the industry. Then I was working on Ramayan Wars, which is a mobile title for an instructor that I worked closely with at Full Sail. He was contracted by another company to work on it, and I was continuing to work on rigs and animation for that. And then Tennis and Rally Copters are two of the games that I worked on with final project staff and instructors. Rally Copters you can find on PlayStation 4 and PS Vita, and definitely one of my biggest accomplishments. And then Anthony Lauder is our lab specialist. All right, he's a game design graduate right from Full Sail. He came through the campus degree program, and there is his email information for you. His Skype, you can see that long string of characters there. You can type that in, but you can also just search his name as you'll see it there, and it will pop up in Skype. So definitely understand that if you're a campus student or an online student, it doesn't matter. Everyone has access to Anthony. So feel free to, I'm pretty sure when you guys message in FSO, it will send a message to both of us. But feel free to add him on Skype, send him an email. Pretty much use both of us as point of contacts or your instructor if I'm not on your section. But know that Anthony is available to you. One of the many resources that we have to help you guys out during this course. All right. So if you're a campus student, right, definitely try to maintain a professional environment, right? So it's a few of the things that you want to avoid and some of my pet peeves, eating, sleeping, and just being completely off task in class to where you're distracting other people. So during our break, you'll be able to grab some lunch. If you need to have, a bottle of water or something like that, or if you need to have a small snack with you in the classroom, that's totally fine. But just don't come in with a whole lunch. All right. So now we're going to get into the midterm project, right? What are we actually doing? What are we actually working on in this course or in the next upcoming months? So you're just about getting to the halfway point in the degree program, right? When you finish project and portfolio 3, you're going to have your associate's degree. All right, so you're trucking along about halfway completed, and then you can continue on with the courses to get the bachelor's. All right, so what we're doing here is this is the very first month of your midterm project. All right, and now we can break down what we're going to be doing in each individual month. All right, so getting into it, project and portfolio 2. Right, the overall goal of this course is to create a level design map inside of Google Draw, right, and then also prove that you can build and complete that map. Right, so there's going to be a set of technical assignments that can showcase that you understand how Perforce and how Unity works, and you can build the level, right? So that's going to be the technical side of things, and then the creative side is actually designing and building that map. So all of the design for the project, well, I shouldn't say all, but most of the design for this project takes place in this course, right? I've heard from level design and Des 3 students that oftentimes they're just implementing in level design. And yes, you can make design decisions when problems come up or when you need to adjust how you're implementing, but all of the design and the backbone will take place in this course. All right. So then in level design, so campus students, this will be pretty much your very next course. Online students, you guys will be taking statistics, and then you'll be jumping into level design. So it won't be the direct following month, but it will be very, very soon after project and portfolio 2. All right, so in level design, you're going to just be implementing the map that you built in project and portfolio 2 into the 3D engine. All right, so by the end of this month, you'll have a fully functioning level, right? So all the gameplay will work. The level will be completely blocked out, as you see in that picture there, right? So we're not focusing at all about aesthetics or textures or materials, what the game looks like, right? You'll see everything has the grid pattern. Your character is the small little block guy, right? It's not a finished 3D model, but it's a fully functioning game with player communication, player feedback, and we can play, or a fully functioning level, right? We can play through the level from start to finish. That is the goal. Then in Project and Portfolio 3, you're going to add that visual polish. And when doing so, you're going to be combining into teams. So in Project and Portfolio 2, you're going to create your own individual map. In level design, you're going to create your own individual area from that map. Then in Project and Portfolio 3, you take those individual areas and combine them into one larger level, right? So everything is going to be consistent where it will line up seamlessly from one student's area onto the next, right? And now this will present you with a few other types of design choices and opportunities to plan ways to transition from one student's area to the next to connect them well, and also start to borrow and build off of others' mechanics, right? So um, if I built pressure plates in my level and Kyle has built exploding barrels, now we can design a scenario where we use pressure plates and exploding barrels together. So it's starting to take these individual areas and tie them together in a larger level, right? So I like to showcase the overall plan of that so you can see month to month to month, so you understand eventually you're going to end up in a team, right? So if you think about that now, about how you can plan for that, and inside the design in your map, it will make you that much more successful in all 3 courses. All right, so now you're probably wondering,
you do here,
right? So what is it that we do here? What is it that we do in this course? How come I'm not just having you guys go ahead and start by creating your map right now, right? Day 1, all right, guys, go ahead and create your map, and I'll see you again in 4 weeks. No, there's going to be a lot of in between that we need to tackle, right, to show that progression. I know for most of the students that come through this course, they may never have built a level before, and ones that have oftentimes haven't gone to the extensive planning, inside of a documentation and then inside of a 2D map. So I know this is a new process for everybody, right? During the course, we're going to have 2 tracks, right? I like to call them a track. So you can think about these as a sequence of assignments, right? We have the creative track and we have the technical track. right? And they're going to run side by side, right? Because keep that in mind. It's the creative track is not week 1 and 2, and technical track is week 3 and 4. No, they're going to be running simultaneously alongside each other. All right, so now I'll go over what each one of those tracks are and what it's made up of. All right, so first in the creative track, you're going to start with the brainstorming assignment. So hopefully by now you know that a game designer isn't just that person that comes up with ideas all day for a living, right? So that job doesn't exist, and I'm sure everybody knows that. But in this assignment, you get to be that idea person, right? You get to come up with all of those ideas, and you'll probably start to notice that this is tough, right? Coming up with tons of ideas, day after day is a very challenging thing, right? But this will show you different ways to generate those ideas and different ways you can force yourself to be creative. Then from there into the brainstorming assignment, we'll move into the level design document. So this is just a short 2 to 3 page document that pretty much showcases everything your level is going to include. All of the interactions, all the mechanics, the player's goal, the overall asset that you're going to be using, everything that you're going to be doing in the level should be showcased in the level design document. So you'll take the ideas that you've generated in the brainstorming and organize them and fill them into place inside the level design document. Then from there, you're going to create a flow chart, right? And I know that everyone did a bunch of flow charting in GD1 and you have a lot of experience with that. So you're going to take that knowledge and apply it to what we're doing here, which is a level flow chart, right? So that is going to talk about the overall plan for how the level progresses from one area to the next, the overall flow and planning of the level, where interactions take place, and how the player gets from one interaction to the next. Once you've completed the flowchart, you move on to the map, right? So you might have seen, if you looked on FSO, and you'll see there you have the map rough. You get 2 attempts at the map, right? Two basically submissions of it that you can turn in and submit for feedback as well as a grade, right? 2 times that we're going to be evaluating you on your progress with the map. So you'll work on your map. This is going to be a 2D top-down representation of everything you're going to be building in Unity, and then you'll be able to turn it in. I'll give you feedback. You'll actually get feedback from your peers as well. So your peers will be able to comment directly right on your map. It's one of the ILA assignments, and oftentimes a way to just get a bunch of feedback and review it, and then move on from there. Right then, it'll be your final map, right? So you can review all that feedback, add in those details, add in any player communication that you need, anything that helps start to understand what is going on in the map and communicate your overall design, right? The map itself is your portfolio piece, right? So what's nice about this is you're going to have this plan right here that you've built, and then in Des 3 you're going to end up with that finished level, right? You'll also have a video, right? During Des 3 you have your playable level that's an executable, and then you'll also be recording videos to present your work. So what's nice about that is you're going to have the map and then you have the video of your level, and that can show you the progression to where here is the design I started with and this is the level I finished with, right? And then that in between, that journey that you took and the stories that you have, that is your fuel for interviews, and that's your fuel to talk about the design choices, and I ran into this problem and I solved it this way. So you'll have your map to showcase the overall design, and then you have your video to show the implementation and the progression that had happened. So the creative track is very important, right? So you'll see here everything builds off of one another. So definitely don't skip out in the first part, right? Some students, avoid the brainstorming and level design document, and then the rest of the month is an uphill battle. So try and stay on top of these, and make sure that you get one after the other. And even if you miss one or you're late on a day with one of the assignments, you can always turn it in for late points. You can review the late policy in the course, as well as it's still helpful to complete it to go on to the next assignment. So A real quick review, the brainstorming and level design document, these answer the question of what is the player doing in the level? What are the interactions? The flowchart will answer the question of how does the level progress? How does the player get from one interaction to the next? And then the map rough and the map final, this is just an overall layout, an overall floor plan that represents what the level looks like, right? Without knowing what we're doing and how we get from one area to the next, what it looks like won't really matter. This is the very final step. This is the polish phase, right? So make sure you start with the core and work your way through. All right, so moving on to the technical track, right? We'll quickly go through this and then I'll take any questions. So into the technical track, we're going to start by just learning and setting up our Unity and Perforce and get those to work together with each other. So I know you've had some decent exposure at this point to Unity through design tools and PNP1. So I know you've used Unity up into that point in those courses. And then Perforce, I know you've had just a very brief exposure to in design tools. So this we're going to jump into further depths this month. Now you're going to actually be connecting to a server. You're going to have your own username. You're going to be able to log into our server and you're going to be able to set up your Unity project and use this as your backup, right? So while you're working on your Unity assignments, you're going to have Perforce there in the background and you're able to save and submit your work to the server, right? Because we know sometimes working with game engines and working with Unity, things might randomly happen to where, the engine, could just crash or something can go wrong and a file can become corrupted. By having our work on the server, we're making sure that we have a backup copy. So we're going to really practice this month using Unity and Perforce together. Also, I'll definitely bring up at this point, all of our assignments that are going to be submitted for grades are going to be turned into the Perforce server. And we have that all in detail into going in how to do that. But the reason why is because when you're out in the industry, you're not going to be using FSO, right? You're not going to be using that type of software on a website. You're going to be using some types of version control and these pieces of software. So by turning in our assignments on to the server, it shows that understanding that you can add files to the server and you show that basic level of understanding. So that's why we're going to be submitting our work onto Perforce. All right. So once we have our project set up and we have the basic understanding of Perforce, we're going to move into the visuals assignment. Okay. So in this assignment, you're going to be provided an image. I give everybody an image. Everyone will be working on the same image. And you're to recreate it in Unity as best as possible, right? So you might be looking at the image there and being like, oh my God, this guy wants us to take this image and make it just like that, right? He wants us to put graffiti on the walls. He wants us to, make this door look broken and all these little debris piles and create all this foliage in the background. And oh my God, how am I going to do all of this? No, don't think of it that high level of detail, right? We don't have to make this look one-to-one. Think about this in terms of a level design exercise and thinking about blocking out and proportion and structure, right? So think about all of the major shapes and the major structures that you see, right? And create those in a way that resembles the image, right? Focus on scale and proportion. The game we're going to be working on is a third-person game where we can actually see our character, right? So using the character and making sure our environments are built to scale is very, very important, right? So that's what you want to be focusing on for the visuals assignment first and foremost. We'll get into more of that in the upcoming lecture and upcoming videos. We have details about the visuals assignment as well, but for this assignment, think of it as like a quiz or an evaluation to see where you are with your skills with Unity, right? And this assignment will also teach you about being able to take a look at a reference image and break it down and analyze it, and then try to recreate that in a 3D space, right? Because we're looking at a flat 2D image, there's some questions that you'll have when working on these types of exercises that you won't be able to know the direct answer, right? Like what's over here to the left of these stairs, right? We don't know that answer. So there'll be things that you have to fill in the gaps yourself and become creative with it. So with an assignment like this, we're just looking that it resembles the scene, and there's that similarity to it and the overall scale to the player and to the world. All right, from there, after the visuals, we'll get into the wind turbine. So this is definitely one of the most challenging technical assignments in the course. But this really showcases a good amount of knowledge to build an entire level in Unity. If you can complete this exercise without any problems, you'll be able to create a successful Scraps level. So in this exercise, it's a three-part series where we first go over creating a complex game object and setting up that hierarchy. And that's important because in the second experiment, we go over setting up the animations and getting the animator built with the different states, which will allow it to transition from state to state when we want it to. And then in the third experiment, we get into creating an actual trigger volume. So I know in PNP1 you guys used the generic behavior, where you're able to, have that on trigger enter, on trigger exit with that basic component. We're going to get into the script where we're going to be writing that script itself and attaching it to our trigger volume, and as well as playing sound effects. So the third experiment will be going over the interactions to get that animation to play when we want it to based on a player interaction, and then playing a sound effect when that interaction happens. So it's a really awesome set of experiments that you'll be jumping into, and then from there, with that knowledge, you'll be creating your entryway, right? So the wind turbine is an ILA, a series of ILA assignments, and then the entryway is your graded assignment, right? So we walk you through and step by step go through the wind turbine, and then afterwards, we just say, go ahead now and create the entryway. What you'll realize from this is once you have this understanding of how to animate an object, you'll notice that it was all the same process, right? Whether you're animating a wind turbine to spin or a door to open and close, or you're animating a camera to be a cutscene, it's all the same process that you'll go through. So it is a really good way to take what you've applied or take what you've learned and apply it to the next assignment. Then from there, we go on to a series of rigid body experiments that you'll be doing in week 4. These experiments will cover things about how to set up objects with our GravNull, how to set collision onto specific and custom objects, and then we'll also cover the hinge joint and different types of joints and constraints inside Unity and how you can use those to benefit your actual level in your project you're working on. Once you've done all of that, you'll take the final exam. So the final exam is a compilation of a lot of what you've learned up here about basic Perforce knowledge and how Perforce works with Unity, and then also the information that you've gained, the knowledge that you've gained from the rigid bodies. There will be that information as well on the final exam. So what you've also may have noticed is that all of the assignments are open from the beginning of the month, to now, or basically from now until the end of the month. Everything is open besides the final exam. So make sure that you can look ahead at those and ask any questions if you have any. We're definitely here to help you out and go over any of the material if it's unclear to you. Alrighty, so now we'll just talk a little bit about what Scraps is, right, and what that game is about. That's the first integrated learning activity, the ILA, is to read through the creative vision and to complete the discussion, right? That will give you a good idea of what Scraps is all about. So definitely make sure you read through that. But we can spend a little bit of time talking about what it is, right? And before we get into the details about Scraps and go over those core mechanics and those major mechanics, let's first talk about the difference between a mechanic and gameplay, right? What is the difference between an actual mechanic and then the gameplay that takes place throughout the game, right? So a mechanic is a construct of rules or methods designed for interaction within the game state, right? So specific rules that happen throughout the game that are specified and they're exact that same way every time, right? So as an example, Mario can jump, right? We all can agree on that. That is a fact, right? Mario can jump. He jumps a certain number of units, right? He has a certain range that he can jump. So now what we can think about is, what is gameplay? We have this mechanic of jumping, but what do we do with it, right? So gameplay is the specific way which players interact within the game using the mechanics. So if we think about it, what are the different ways that Mario uses jump, right? There's plenty of different ways that Mario can jump, right? So some examples, Mario can jump on a Goomba, right? Jump up and down, right? Mario can jump over a gap. Mario can also to jump on a brick, right? So there's lots of different things from here. We could even keep going further, right? You can jump to grab a collectible, or jump to avoid an enemy, right? So you could jump to land on an enemy, jump to avoid an enemy. You can also jump to reach the flagpole, right? Jump over a green pipe. Lots of different ways to use the jump mechanic. Each one of those little instances, right, where we're saying Mario jumps on a Goomba, or Mario jumps to avoid a Goomba, Mario jumps to break a brick, right? Each one of those sentences, we're going to call that a setup, right? Just a small individual instance of gameplay, a small little chunk that takes place, right? If you think about it that way and start to break down your level in that level of detail in terms of modularity, then it will make your design that much more successful, where you're just designing interactions that take place, and then from there you can figure out where those interactions happen, right? But this is definitely a good place to start, is understanding what the mechanic is, and then the gameplay, which is specific ways that you're going to use those mechanics, right? And those are going to be setups. All right, so scraps. Scraps is a third-person action exploration game, right? So you'll read through the creative vision and you'll get a good idea of what it's about, but you'll also notice that there's areas of it that it's vague, right? So the creative vision is vague for a reason, because we want to allow you guys, the designers, to have potential, or to have a lot of space to make those choices, right? So one obvious thing is, you'll notice we don't tell you what caused the apocalypse. We leave that open to interpretation, open to the creative mind to come up with something that had caused this big catastrophic event, or what that event actually was. Also, like, it's set into the not so distant future, right? So it gives you a sense of time, but it's still open for interpretation. As well as the mechanics and the things that you choose. There's a lot of room for design space, but still things you have to avoid and stay away from, right? So basically, overall, what happens in this game, right, is scrappers are going to receive missions from the bastions to complete, right? Some type of mission or some type of objective that the scrapper needs to do, right? They get sent out into the wastes, out into this desolate area to accomplish some goal, right? So they're sent on a mission to retrieve a valuable item, right, from the wasteland. What that item is up to you to decide. You can also send them on some type of objective or some type of plan to, do something or accomplish a goal while out in the wastes, right? So think about it that way, right? So what the player finds and then how they find it is up to you, right? What they're going to be doing and what they're doing inside this environment is definitely up to you. So think about, right, the exploration games. If you haven't played any of these types of games, if you're only one that, you just like to play shooters, you just like to play MOBAs, try and do some research. And if you can't get your hands on the games, definitely check out any YouTube or Let's Play videos on different types of games, to where, try and find games where there's no enemies, or it's very puzzle focused and much less about combat. That is the type of interactions and the puzzles and the overall gameplay you want to shoot for with scraps, not so much about killing and enemies and things like that, right? So if you've seen either of these two references, right, on the left we have MacGyver, on the right we have Rambo. Think MacGyver rather than Rambo, right? Rather than run and gun and mow everything down. think MacGyver and think strategy and ways to use your environment and use your surroundings to solve puzzles and accomplish different goals, right? So there's the little image down there where Rambo's got the knife, right? That's what Rambo used. MacGyver will use a paper clip, right, and can accomplish the same goals. So think about that level in types 2, trying to accomplish creative goals and interesting puzzles. All right, next we're going to talk about the core mechanics, right? The mechanics that we are giving to you, right? And it's important that we go over these because what you want to understand is these are your core mechanics, and then later we're going to talk about major mechanics. Those are going to be two separate things. Core mechanics are provided to you. Major mechanics are things you're going to create yourself, or design and create yourself. So let's just quickly go over what the core mechanics are. All right, so first is the Grabnall, right? So if you played any game, game like Half-Life, the ability to pick up and carry physics objects, right? So any object in Unity that has a rigid body component, you can set it up to be able to be picked up and manipulated with the Grabnall, as well as thrown, right? So pick up with the left click of the mouse, right click for throw. Right, and everything that we go over, I definitely highly recommend everybody playing around and testing out the character. You obviously will get that once we get your Perforce login set up, but you'll be able to get a feel for what our character is like and how the Grabnall works, and that definitely will aid in your design. All right. Next is movement. It may sound simple, but I'm just going to go over it. So, moving with the keys, jumping, and crouching, that is given to you, right? So you can't use jumping as your own major mechanic, right? It's going to be slightly more advanced than that and a little bit more complex than just moving. But these are things that you can create some setups for within your level, right? But these are the mechanics we're going over. So jumping, crouching, and overall just moving, right? The character can't double jump. He can't wall run or anything out of the box like that. He can't swim, but that is what he can do: is jump, crouch, and move. All right. The flashlight. So he is equipped with a flashlight. You can press F to turn it on and off, and it's really good for if you're in darker lit areas, you're able to see in those spots. So it's attached to the player that can be toggled on and off. We have a health system, right? So for actually taking damage and giving the player health back, whether it be a health station or a health kit, we have that in place, and then you can set that up to work within your level right out of the box. Also, we have an inventory system. So you might have seen it from some of the images. You'll definitely see it coming up very soon. That we have it right on the side of the screen. We have that inventory that you can track all the objects that are in the level, and then as well as the ones that the player has collected. So the base inventory system of it functioning is the core mechanic provided to everybody. Also, we have the damage volumes. All right. So the damage volume could be a range of many different things, but as it works now, right, we have just a box collider that has that health system communicating with it and actually be able to remove health from the player when they're inside the volume. So visually, it could be anything from fire to toxic waste to a big sandstorm to poisonous gas. It could be even more than that, right? Electrified water, anything you can think of, right? But that system of the player taking damage is in place and is working for everybody, and then you can add the visuals to it on top of it. All right, so these are your core mechanics. All right, so then the overall vision of Scraps. All right, the post-apocalyptic, we said not too distant future, so there is some technology, right? You can have a sci-fi feel to it. We do have the Grabnall. Obviously, that's a bit futuristic. So think about that range, right? Mad Max, Fallout, Recore. That's in terms of theming, right? In terms of the overall vision of the aesthetics. I will also mention that we have a asset depot that we built for everyone to utilize, right? So we have these assets that everyone can build from, that can build their level out of. that all fit within the scraps vision already. So rather than spending time trying to find or create your own assets that fit with this quote unquote theme, um, you can just start to focus on the level design, right? Keep that in mind. That's the purpose. That's what you've been hired to do, is create levels for this game. So we have some assets for you, but keep that in mind, because if you think post-apocalyptic or that sci-fi technology, it might start to adjust the mechanics that you want to create or that you want to build. All right. So now we'll just spend a little bit of time getting into this week's assignment, right? The first thing that you're going to be tasked to be doing inside of Google to start to create this map, right? Create this process that is going to be your scraps level. All right. So starting with the brainstorming, okay? This assignment is definitely going to be one that will open your eyes in terms of how the design process works, because these types of exercises, there are industry professionals that do maybe not 100 ideas every day, but there are some that will do 15 or 30 ideas every day of just an interesting game mechanic or an interesting game possibility, right? So this is something that you're going to have to practice at. It might not be easy at first, but this is definitely a good place to start. So, starting with bad storming, right, or bad ideas, that's the first thing that is required for this assignment. And you'll see that this assignment has different ways for you to generate ideas. That's the purpose, is to show you there's several different ways for you to come up with interesting ideas. It's not just start at number one and go down a list. You can do different things to get your creative juices going. So starting with just bad ideas, all right? So at this section, I don't want you to be so, so stressed or so worried about, oh my God, I got to make sure this fits with the creative vision, or I have to make sure I don't do this and I don't do that, and I'm not allowed to do this instead. Don't worry about any of that for the brainstorming section. Just get comfortable getting your ideas on paper. It could be something silly. It could be something that would be boring. But the most important part when doing this exercises, remember, we're creating setups, we're creating interactions. All right. So, for example, right, the player has a runny nose, and the player needs to find tissue boxes throughout the level and interact with them to pull tissues out. Otherwise, their nose will dry out. Right? That doesn't sound very exciting. Doesn't sound very interesting. But I got something down on paper. I have an idea. I have something. I can move on to the next one. So this could be just something that maybe would be too out of scope. It doesn't fit within the vision. It's just getting used to getting your ideas on paper, right? 10 of those. Then moving on to the random association ideas. So inside the assignment, we have a link to a random word generator. All right, so that'll take you to a website, and it will just generate a random word. Then your job from there is to use that word in some way to create a setup or create an interaction inside of your level. Right? Then from there, you have 20 of them. You'll have this list of 20. From there, you might notice some of them don't really fit very well. Some of them don't make much sense. But you might see there's 3 or 4 of them in there, or 5 that really work well, that are meaningful, right? So when you watch the John Cleese video, which is later this week, he mentions that, to where a computer, right? His phrase that he uses in there is, a computer can make any random connection between a banana and random, or a banana and government conspiracy, right? The computer can make a connection between that, but it will take a human mind or a human brain to actually decipher if there's any meaning there. So you might make all of these connections, these random word associations, and then go through and find 4 or 5 that actually have some potential that you could expand upon, or it might allow you to go down a different road or take a different approach. All right, next will be the free-form ideas. And I feel like this section here is either students' favorite section, or they hate it. They don't know what to do at all. Right? So in this section, This is basically going to be, if you've got your, this is basically, start to just generate ideas for your level, in any fashion that you'd like, right? So if you're not too sure about what you want to make, or you don't really have a good plan, this might be a challenge for you. But if I've been talking this whole time and you're already are ready to go and you're just waiting for me to shut up so you can start creating your ideas, then this might be a good section for you. What I recommend for anybody that's struggling with a section like this, or just a good plan to take for your whole level and or your whole brainstorming document, is to think of some of those mechanics that you want to build in your level. Think of those potential major mechanics that you want to have, and try to design setups for those. And let me give you some examples. Right, so we'll see in some slides coming up some of the mechanics you can use. But so turrets, right? You're allowed to have turrets in your level, right? Or pressure plates. Also, exploding barrels, I've mentioned already, right? So those are three mechanics that could be something you build in your level. So for your 30 freeform ideas, you could say, okay, what are 5 interactions I could design that use turrets? Then from there, you could say, okay, what are 5 interactions I could use that create pressure, that use pressure plates? And then from there, do the same thing for exploding barrels, right? Do 10 for each or do 5 for each. It doesn't matter, but if you're able to start to think about the mechanics you can use, then you'll be able to carry over your ideas with you much better into the level design document. But just 30 freeform ideas, anything that you'd like in that section. Then moving on to the 20 incremental step ideas. So this is definitely one of my favorites. I think that this is a great way to come up with a good variety of ideas very quickly. Definitely one of my favorites for this assignment. So I have an example we can go over right here. Right, so right here would be just, you can pull one of your ideas from any other category already. So it could be something from random association, something from your free form. Just start with, okay, number 1 is an idea from another category, right? The player must interact with the mobile solar panel and position it so that the panel is pointing towards the sun. This then powers a building door, allowing the player access. That's number 1. All right, so the number 2 in the incremental step would be something like this. So it's going to be the exact same thing. You'll copy number 1 and put it in number 2. And now your goal is to change one word or one phrase, right, to make the sentence different, right? So the player must interact with the mobile solar panel and position it so that the panel is pointing towards a deadly laser. This then powers a building door, allowing the player access. So we change it to, rather than pointing it towards the sun, we're pointing it towards a deadly laser. So that's number 2. Then number 3 would be something like this, right? The player must interact with the mobile solar panel, position it so that the panel is pointing towards the deadly laser, and this then powers a force field that protects the scrapper. All right, so now it's starting to change, and we're starting to just change one word or one phrase at a time, so that number 1 is going to be drastically different from number 20, and you're going to have this big range in between. So I really like this one because it's very fast and it's very quick. If you're struggling with other categories, right, I'm totally okay with this. If you're struggling with freeform and you only do 20 freeform and you want to do 30 incremental step or some other number, I'm okay with that. So that's definitely something you can do. This assignment just should show you different ways for you to come up with these ideas. Alrighty, and then lastly is going to be the reductive ideas. So this is basically the last category, and I don't really ever want to see this category blank. I'm not sure why it ever would be, because this should be basically a compilation of all the ideas you want to move forward with you into the level design document. So basically, if you have, 5 ideas from freeform that you really like, you have 5 from random association that you really like, and then you have 10 from incremental step or any combination, you're just going to compile them and put them into the reductive ideas, or basically your finalized ideas. If you've gone through all of these sections and you're like, okay, now I have a good plan for what I actually want to build, then you're going to start to put it into reductive. So these 20 reductive ideas should be what you're bringing with you into your level design document. All right, so just a few tips and tricks to do this assignment. So definitely read the creative vision. I know that it's required, it's definitely important, but seriously read through it and make sure you understand it. If you have any questions about it that weren't already answered in the creative vision discussion, definitely reach out to myself or Anthony or even your instructor on your section to clarify anything. But make sure you understand that that's what you're designing for. You're designing a scraps level that fits within that vision. All right, definitely, like I mentioned before, choose some of those mechanics. So in the Scraps Creative Vision, we also have a section called Acceptable Major Mechanics. Choose some of those mechanics and start to brainstorm ideas that use those mechanics. And then lastly, I know it's hard, it's easier said than done, but definitely give yourself time for this type of assignment, as well as all of them for this course. If you try and do this assignment or others in this course in just one sitting, you're going to overwhelm yourself and you're going to stress yourself out. And with things like this where it's design focused, the quality can start to suffer because of that. So if you can, early in the week, just work on, tackle one section at a time, or work on bad ideas and random association. And then the next day do freeform ideas. And then later that day work on the next section. Try and break it up in chunks to keep your mind fresh if it's possible. Alrighty, so getting into the level design document, definitely this will be completed after you've done the brainstorming and have a good plan for the interactions that you could potentially create. A few things to keep in mind when designing this. Some of this will definitely become more important as we go forward into the map layout, but definitely good things to keep in mind when you're designing it, just writing text on paper. Right, so Scraps is a linear experience, right? So focus on building a linear gameplay, right? So the reason why that I encourage everybody to do this, and you see there it says players experience 90 to 100% of your area's content. You're just a student right now, right? And you're just building this level. Your goal, your target audience is your potential employer, right? You're going to try to get a job at the end of this. You're going to get a job at the end of this. So what you want to have is your work be as presentable as possible. So if you're creating a big open world or an expansive, massive level with just a lot of just traversal and walking, right? It's going to be difficult to show that off in a video form or in a short bite-sized pieces. So try to keep it to a linear experience to where all of your work is seeing, right? All of that hard work and all that effort that you put into your level, you want players to experience pretty much all of it, right? You don't want anything to be missed, right? So also avoid, those just complete open world, big sandbox type game that has multiple endings or multiple paths and optional things, right? Like big massive games like GTA or Assassin's Creed or the big levels that are open and expansive. Those are teams that have a lot of resources, a lot of time, and can focus on those details on that scale, right? You're just one individual who's tasked with creating a level, so you don't want to bite off way more than you can chew. So focus on quality rather than just sheer quantity. All right. The next thing to keep in mind when you're building your level and planning out your document is that you're going to be creating a level that is 2 to 4 minutes in gameplay. Right? So keep that in mind that we're talking about gameplay here. So that doesn't mean that you can have a 3-minute cutscene and then just 1 minute of gameplay and call it good. We want to focus on what the player is doing throughout the level. What are the interactions? And then there it says new players. So that doesn't mean a brand new player that's never picked up a controller at all before, that's never played a video game. We're just talking about someone that's never seen your level before, right? So someone that is just sitting down to play through this experience. They have knowledge about how to play games, but they're never seen your scraps level before. We should try to build an experience that they can complete that within 2 to 4 minutes of core gameplay, right? So that's not going to take into account if a player dies and they respawn and have to start again or something like that, but just the ideal best playthrough from a new player should fit within that range, right? So also keep in mind again about you'll be recording a video of your map, right? And this is a really great way to present your work is in a video form, right? So if we can watch a 2 to 4 minute video and they're interested and they're hooked, then you're going in the right path, right? But if your 2 to 4 minute video has just a player walking or it's just exploring without any set goal, then that might lose players' interest. So try and make sure that you're focusing on that quality. There's a lot of density and the creative interactions that are happening for these players to experience. All right, so yeah, just keep in mind we're not making a level that's 20 minutes or a half an hour. Each individual students will be this 2 to 4 minutes. So when you come together as a team, right? Say we're on a team of 5, that video or that level would fall anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to complete, right? Somewhere in that range. And then always, it should definitely read like a scraps level, right? I'll definitely keep saying that and keep reiterating. Always have that creative vision open and available so you can go through and compare anything that might be inconsistent. Alrighty, so getting into the 4 parts of the level design document. First, we'll start with the player's goal. So you're tasked to describe a single specific objective that the player must complete. All right, and in this section, be very detailed. Don't just give a very vague, one-sentence response. Try and answer as much of the following questions as possible, as well as just add in any details about your level. Right. So think about this player's goal as your elevator pitch. Right. So you walk into an elevator and you have that elevator ride to pitch your idea to someone that could fund this project, right? What is that pitch that you're going to sell this off to, right? So some of the questions you want to answer are: what does the player have to do, right? What is that task that they're set out to complete, right? Also, how will they do it, right? What is the obstacle in their way, or what is the main thing that is needs to be overcome in order to accomplish that goal? Right. Who are they doing it for? Right. So I highly encourage everybody to, you can design and come up with a character or a personality for the Bastion that has sent you out into the waste. Right. Whoever this is could have some type of ulterior motive. Right. He could be just really goofy. He could be, or he or she could be, out to, plot revenge on another scrapper, right? There's a lot of different ideas that you can go with in that, and if you get into that and you really immerse yourself into what you're doing, that will show in your work. So if you really start to come up with who these personalities are or why they sent you here, right, which is the next question, right? Where do they have to go and why have they come? Right, really start to immerse yourself. It really shows in the work. So start to think about all of that. Start to visualize who is this best that sent them. Where do they have to go in the waste to get that item? What is that key location or that certain location that has that object? And then why does the player care? Right? Why do I care as a player to actually go accomplish this? What's the motivation? So do I get rewarded for something for completing this goal or bringing it back? Is there some emotional connection to what I'm doing? So oftentimes I'll get a objective like, go collect the medicine, and that's it. Right? That's all that they tell me. But I'm asking myself, what does the medicine mean? Is it the medicine for myself because I have a cold? Is it for my dying daughter? Is it for is it for the medicine that will cure the outbreak, the virus that broke out and caused the apocalypse? So what is that connection? And really start to build some meaning into what the player is doing and really leave those players with that sense of accomplishment when they beat your level, right? So the player's goal is going to be something that the player has to complete to progress, right? They're going to complete this goal. But think about it, what is going to give them that sense of accomplishment when they actually do complete that objective, right? That's what you want to build and start to portray. All right, next we're going to get into the featured asset. All right, so there's a few key requirements that you have to stick to with your featured asset, or you want to try and strive to meet. But there's a lot that you can do with this featured asset. So first and foremost, we want an asset to be visually striking, right? So the featured asset is going to be one asset that you're going to include in your level that is visually striking or eye-catching, right? The players should understand that this is something that they can interact with and that it's something that grabs their attention, right? So try to pick something that is eye-catching and stands out from the other assets in the level. Also with your featured asset, it should be tied to player progression, right? So this will continue to show different examples, right? So here we have the crane, here we have a generator, and we want them to be tied to player progression. Going back to, we don't want to create anything that's optional for the player, right? We want this big setup or this overall goal to be tied to progression in some way. So here the example with the generator, right? We could have the generator. It's missing, a hose. We need to find a wrench to repair it, and it's missing some coolant, right? So we have to go find all those pieces and attach it to the generator. When it's back up and running again, it powers off a force field, right? Or it deactivates something, or it opens up a door. It lowers a drawbridge, something along the lines like that to allow the player to progress, right? So it's tied to player progression. With our crane over here, we could have a setup to where there needs to be, a wrecking ball or something we attach to the crane, and then we rotate it. The player goes into here and rotates it, and it breaks through a wall, right? And it allows the player to progress, right? So two examples so far. Right, next, lastly, or another thing you want to stick to is it should be interactive, right? Just like the two examples I just gave, something that the player does to interact with this asset to, modify the environment or do impact some type of cause and effect, right? So not just something that the player looks at, right? We want to differentiate between like a visual landmark and a featured asset. Right, so in levels, right, or in games, right, having some type of large landmark is important and it helps in terms of level design. If you have a level with a big statue in the middle and you keep coming back to that same area, that large statue lets you know you're in a place, a familiar place, right? Or if you have like some type of like, hedge maze or some type of forest, having like a cabin or something specific as a landmark helps let you know that, hey, you've been here before. So visual landmarks are definitely good to have in your level, but for a featured asset, we want it to be interactive, something more than just a big object in the level. All right. Also, we want something to be memorable, right? So what we mean by this is if you've ever played a game or if you've ever, you've either played a game or played a level, and by the time you got through it, you were like, wow, that was really cool. Like, I want to go tell my friends to go play this game because I enjoyed it so much, right? Or I had this awesome experience. I really liked it. So I want to share that experience with other people. That's what you want to leave the player with your featured asset, right? So for the tank over here, maybe we have a setup to where we need to go find a tank round, and we pick it up with the grabnol and we carry it over and we put it inside of the barrel of the tank, right? And then we can rotate or move. Maybe the tank's on a big pedestal, and the pedestal can move and adjust, and we can fire the tank round and blow a hole in a wall, or hit hit like a big water tank and spill water everywhere. Some big elaborate event to where it's like, wow, that was a really cool event that happened in the level, along the lines of all the others that I'd mentioned so far. So try and think about those types of interactions that you can have for your own featured asset. I would say that the generator is probably the most common asset that I see, just because it's probably the first thing your brain jumps to. I encourage you to play with this idea for a few days, right? Or give yourself time to come up with a few different ideas for the featured asset and think about different ways you can make it interactive, and tie it to progression and the requirements we're looking for here, and then choose the best one from that. So lastly, you'll see the microscope down here, and you're probably wondering, like, well, that's all the other ones up here are really big and massive objects, but then we have this microscope that would be pretty small. So yes, that should show you that it doesn't necessarily need to be massive or huge to be visually striking, right? We could have this microscope, on a table with a really nice light or something shining on it just to grab the player's attention. That can definitely be visually striking, right? And this was actually a student example that he had this microscope that you would collect these little pieces of evidence and these pieces of data throughout the level, and then you'd go up to this microscope and interact with it. And then you'd be able to see those clues through the microscope lens. So what was really cool was that when you interacted, it transitioned the player from a third person perspective into a first person, like they're looking through the microscope. And it gave you some information uh, to allow you to progress later on in the level. So it was a really awesome asset because it wasn't something that was just massive or a big object, but still had a very nice meaning and a memorable experience that I still remember to this day. All right, so definitely be creative with this, right? Like I was saying, push yourself to come up with a few different ideas and then different ways those ideas could work, right? Because, like I said, a generator is probably the most hands down completed featured asset, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done very, very well, right? There's a lot of things you can do with that all by itself that you can make it unique and you can push yourself to make it, stand out from the others. All right, so here's an example of a featured asset, and this is the level of detail that I want to see in the level design document, right? So, you'll see a sports car is my featured asset. So that doesn't mean you can just write featured asset, sports car, and then move on. Try and break it down into explaining all of those little those categories that we just went over: the visually striking, the tied to player progression, and interactive and memorable. Explain all of that. What is the interaction? Why is it going to be a memorable experience? And this is just design, right? So here we can design something that is definitely our best case scenario if we have the time to implement it, and then we can start to refine the design as we go forward, right? So definitely, if you feel like you're not, you don't know what you can accomplish and what you're unable to build, technically, I recommend just getting it down on paper and letting us as the instructors, review your work and get you going in the right direction. Right, but here's an example of a featured asset and the detail I'd like to see in your document. So, this is tied to the player's goal. The goal of the player was to find this sports car that someone from the Bastion has requested and return it home to them. Right, so when the player finds this car, they notice that there's two parts of it that are missing. Right, so it has a flat tire and the battery is dead. So the player needs to go ahead and find those objects with the grav null, right? They can find the replacement tire on another vehicle, and then they can go into the hood of another car and pull off the hood and then grab the battery and then attach it to the other vehicle, right? And this is just something small I added at the end, so then the parts will snap into place when they're within the trigger volume, right? So when you carry over the tire and you bring it near where the tire needs to go, it will snap that object into place and attach it onto the sports car itself. All right. Then once they have the battery and the tire in place, they can interact with the vehicle, right? So they can walk up to the driver's side door and they can press E. When they do so, it triggers a cutscene where the player enters the car, and this is going to be the transition of the exit of my level. So when it triggers this, it gives them the view like they're inside of the vehicle. So you might be asking yourself, or you might be questioning now, you're like, wait a minute, I read the creative vision, and it says that I'm not allowed to have drivable vehicles. So yes, you are correct. You're not able to get into any type of vehicle and actually control and move the vehicle free reign, give the player control. That will cause a lot of other problems. But what you can do and what you're able to do, especially if you start designing it now, is some type of cutscene to where you're quote unquote driving the car, right? But the player doesn't actually have control. So how a cutscene will work is basically the starting and ending point will always be the same location. So the player doesn't have any chance to brake, or drive into, a wrong direction or anything like that. So this is a way around that. Without having necessarily control to drive the vehicle, you can have it as an animated cutscene. And I've seen students do this anything from, a helicopter to a car to, a water truck, to a small little mine cart. I've seen all different kinds of things that are basically like a vehicle, but it's a cutscene instead. All right. So then, once the player is in and the cutscene triggers, the vehicle will drive out of the side of the building, right? And then they get picked up by the helicopter, right? So they drive out of the building like they're going to crash, and then the helicopter swoops in and they land right on that little rack down there, and then the helicopter flies them to the ground, and that will start the next student's scene. So that's my plan for how the player is going to exit my level and transition into the next area of the level. All right, so next we're going to be getting into the major mechanics, right? So this is the third major section of the level design document. All right, so these major mechanics should be level specific mechanics that will be taught to the player and reused over the course of the area. So level specific are the key words there, things that you want to make sure you understand. It definitely needs to be something that is inside the level, that's not an addition or an attachment to the player. And we can go over that in more detail. All right, so there's two sections that you need to define within each mechanic. First, you have to describe what the mechanic actually is, right? So for example, when we were saying Mario can jump, you'd want to go into detail. Mario can jump 5 units high, right? Or get into the details how the mechanic works. And more specifically, what are the player's actions, right? What are the interactions that the player does? So for a scraps example, saying, if you just say my major mechanic is exploding barrels, well, that doesn't really tell me your plan or how the mechanic is going to be used or the rules for it. But you could say, my mechanic is the mechanic I will be using is exploding barrels. When they come into contact with this type of material, right? You could specify if they come into contact with wooden objects, they will explode and break the wooden objects. If the wooden barrel, the exploding barrels can be placed near walls that have this type of symbol on it or this type of decal, and then they will be, destroyed. Start to get into that. Also, if the player is standing too close, they will take damage. Really start to define every rule for how the mechanic works. Same thing for force fields, right? You could say, force fields are in my level, but maybe you want to design a system to where you have a blue force field and an orange force field. Blue force fields allow only objects to pass through them, and orange force fields only the player can pass through them. And then you can say there's a console that allows the player to switch between both of the colors or allows them to, interact. Whatever you're going to define, you can see just because we say force fields as a mechanic doesn't mean everybody's going to implement it the same way. There's still, rules that you can define within that mechanic. So first, figure out what those rules are. Then from there, you're going to describe 3 different setups that you're going to be using that mechanic, right? Like we say up here, taught to the player and reused over the course of the area. So that's what games are all about, right? If you see that and you start to, analyze games on that level, is that you'll notice that, there's systems that are taught to the player and then they're just reused over and over again in different ways, right? You try to get as much mileage as possible out of those mechanics, right? You have it in place, you've built it, now you want to use it as many times as possible, right? And it's our job as the designers to reuse those mechanics in different ways so it feels unique, it feels fresh every time, and it's not constantly repetitive, right? So if you just see we'll go back to the exploding barrels example. If we just have exploding barrel and then we have a wooden crate, and every time you just pick up the exploding barrel and throw it at the wooden crate. So it's every single time you see it, you do the same thing. That's going to get really boring eventually, right? But if you're doing different interactions, you're using the exploding barrels for different purposes, then it starts to feel unique and fresh every time. That's what you want to shoot for. So here's an example of what you want to strive for on your LDD. I'm not going to go through and read all of this to you, but you'll notice here this is more than just saying tripwires is my mechanic, right? We actually go into detail saying a physics object can set it off, right? So you can use a grab-null to throw it, and it goes into detail how the tripwire is going to work. Then we get into introducing, practicing, and mastering that mechanic, those three different uses of the mechanic. All right, so now we'll get into talking about those three terms: introduce, practice, and master. All right, as well as let's talk about some acceptable mechanics. All right, so some acceptable mechanics, like I've said a few times already: exploding barrels, right? Conveyor belts, pressure pads, pressure plates, any type of like weight system like that. Force field, I mentioned that a few times, and springboards or any type of jump pad, something like that, right? So how the player is going to interact with these is definitely up to you. So what you should keep in mind with these is these are all level specific mechanics. All these are great examples of being level specific. So it should be something that exists within your level without changing the player's character, right? So the purpose of that and why you have to stay away from changing the player is because we want to make sure the player is consistent going from area to area. So say, for example, I really want to give the player double jump, right? So for some reason, I want to give the player double jump to make him jump higher in certain areas. So say we're all working together, right? A group of us are working together, and now the player completes my level, and then Joshua's level is next, and Joshua has his platforming section in his area, right? But I've already given the player double jump, so now all of the platforming in Joshua's area is broken. So rather than changing the player, we want to find ways to accomplish those same goals using level-specific mechanics, right? So rather than double jump, right? So I want to give the player double jump. Well, ask yourself, what do I really want to accomplish? I want the player to jump higher or reach higher areas. So a springboard or a jump pad will do that same thing, right? It will accomplish that same goal. But rather than giving the player to double jump everywhere, now they're only able to do it in this one location or where you place the springboards. It now becomes about the level design, about strategically designing places about where the springboards are located to reach those higher places. Another way to accomplish the same goal, rather than double jump, you can have a collectible that can temporarily increase the player's jump height or movement speed or things like that. So you collect this item and now for the next 20 seconds you have increased jump height. That is a way to do it as well. If you want to temporarily modify the player, that will work, all right? But the level specific mechanics are the best route to take because it allows you to do a lot with just a simple mechanic with different ways of combining them. All right, so some unacceptable mechanics, things you want to avoid doing, right? Just like we've said, any permanent changes to the player, right? Keyword there, permanent. So if it's something that is only a temporary change, then and you can technically pull it off, then it will work, right? Or any functionality to the core mechanics, right? So say you want to add a grab-null upgrade, right? You want to improve the grab-null or modify the grab-null in any way, or you want to add a black light to the flashlight, right? Or change the color of the flashlight. Any change to the core mechanic is also something you want to stay away from, as well as the core mechanics themselves, right? So saying that my mechanic is the grab-null. Well, no, that is provided to you. That is a core mechanic. But you can use the grab-null to support your major mechanic. So as an example, again, the exploding barrels, right? The exploding barrels are the mechanic, but the player can pick them up using the grab-null. right? So that's a good example of using a core mechanic to support a major mechanic, right? So just some examples again: double jump, right? We just talked about that. A jetpack, right, is a permanent change to the player. A grappling hook, or a way to just give the player a way to swing from point to point. Or a grappling hook is basically trying to give altered movement to the player. And there are other ways you can accomplish that, like with conveyor belts or with some type of level specific object rather than something the player can do everywhere, right? Or some type of skill tree or player upgrades or advancements, things like that. Again, stay away from stuff like this. Try to think of things that are level specific that you can add to your level, and then also add to the overall level that your team builds. All right. So now we'll get into the concept of introduce, practice, and master, right? So introduce, this is probably something that you've experienced all your life, but maybe haven't really recognized it happening. And you will start to see it all over the place in games and all over the place with different mechanics. So giving the player a mechanic for the first time, you want it to be very easy and straightforward to understand, right? And it should be in a safe space. So when I learn this new mechanic, there's no major punishment if I screw up, or there's no major time constraint, right? So if we think about with Mario, right when we learn that jump mechanic, we learn jump right at the beginning of the game, right? And and then we're talking about original Mario, like they've done a great job of not having to have text on screen or anything like that. So yes, the controller was simple at the time. There was only two buttons, but right when the game started, there was a Goomba coming at you, right when the game starts, right. So there's that image of the game. So you basically have that pretty much the time from when the level loads up to when that Goomba approaches you to learn jump. That is the introduction to the jump mechanic. So in this scenario, yes, you can die. There is some punishment for failure, but it is pretty minimal because you start right back in the same exact location. Right? If you got all the way to the end and died and then got back, and got sent to the beginning of the level, that would be a bit higher punishment. Or you basically the game ended as soon as you died one time. That would be punishment, right? But you lose one life, you learn, okay, I can't run into Goombas, and then you start back at the beginning, right? But you're introduced to that jump mechanic, and here as well, you can say you're still being introduced to the mechanics. So you can jump and break these bricks, right? Very safe place for players to understand, okay, I can do this action, I can jump. Then getting into practice, you can start to use the mechanic in at least in a more advanced or difficult setup, right? So practicing proves that the player understands how to efficiently use the mechanic, right? How to effectively use the mechanic in different ways or use it, efficiently. So continuing with the Mario example, right? So yeah, you can also incorporate them with other mechanics as well. So in the Mario example here, right? This is right after that first little section there where you're introduced to the Goomba and to jump. You'll see these two different pipes, right? So this is a very subtle way to teach the player you can tap A to jump a certain height, or you can hold down A to jump even higher, right? So that's showing them how to efficiently use that jump mechanic in different ways, right? And then they continue to basically, you can really argue that, the rest of the level you're practicing, or even maybe the rest of World 1, you're practicing the jump mechanic, right? So where eventually, in Mario at first, the gaps are very short, and then they start to become even longer, right? Or you jump from platform to platform, eventually the platforms start moving, right? That progression is starting to become more difficult over time. Right? So then mastery, right? Mastery is a challenging setup that tests the skills of the player, and this is definitely usually incorporated with other mechanics, right? It can be the most challenging in the final, someone had mentioned, a quote unquote final boss. This would be like your final test and the final puzzle or the final challenge for the player using this mechanic, right? So continuing with Mario, in this top image up here, you'll see that this is from one of the castles, right, in World 5. Here we're jumping from platform to platform, and notice that, okay, now we are punished if we miss the jump because we're going to fall in lava, right? So it's a pretty much a higher punishment. And now we're incorporating other mechanics where we have this fireball that's shooting up out of the lava over time. So we have to time our jump there, as well as we have the fireballs that are spinning around this block, right, that Mario needs to avoid, right? So we have this other element of if we die, we're going to get punished and go back to the beginning of the castle, as well as you have these other hazards you need to avoid. And then down here, I found this, and I thought this was a great example of someone that has practiced this mechanic and knows it so well, maybe even better than the developers, that they can show the ability to do some amazing things with that jump mechanic. So that's really pushing it to the limits and showing that they understand how to use that mechanic as effectively as possible. Right? So think about when you're designing your mechanics, different and creative ways that you can use your mechanics in your level, right? So if you have conveyor belts or force fields or exploding barrels, try and come up with different and creative ways that you're using them throughout your level. And if you want to have more than one, right, so or more than one practice or more than one mastery, that's totally fine. So if you want the player to practice twice with one of your mechanics, just come up with those ideas now and get them down on paper. The minimum is 3 for each one, but I'm definitely fine with you doing more than just 3, right? If you do introduce, practice, practice, master, or something along those lines. So here is an IPM chart from one of our final project teams, and I just like to go over this to show you IPM on a larger scale. So this is going to represent IPM across an entire game, right? So on the left over here, these are all of the mechanics that the game has that the player needs to learn. So what this was, this game was called Carbon Copy. It was basically a 2D side scroller. You could make copies of yourself. You made this derp clone, which just stood in place. You had the boom clone, which would pretty much spawn in and then 3 seconds later would explode. And then you had the poof clone, which would disappear after 3 seconds. So you have these 3 different types of clones. You can make copies of yourself, and they had these other mechanics that they worked well with. So you make a derp clone, and it stood in place on a pressure pad. So across the top over here, these are the level numbers, right? So starting at level 1, and they had 19 levels in their game. And then what they've done here, so this is before they even started building the game, is they would plan out where the player is going to be introduced, where they're going to practice, where they're going to master each one of these mechanics, right? And you see when they've done this, it starts to form this curve, right? So you can see we're always being introduced to new interactions, new things up until level 13, right? And then we're able to continue to develop those skills over the course of the entire game. So if something like this didn't exist, right, if we just introduced everything in level 1, it would make players feel very overwhelmed, right? And there's just so much to learn at once. There's just so much going on that it's hard to take it all in at once. It's going to overwhelm players. You're going to lose a lot of your audience. But then the audience that does actually get through level 1, right? They've been introduced to every single mechanic in the game, and now they've made it to level 10, and now they're going to have the opposite effect. Now they're going to be bored, right? Because now they're in level 10. They've seen everything already. Everything has been introduced, so there's nothing new to give the player to keep them going, so they might lose interest because there's nothing new going on. So this curve is pretty much, the player's dopamine drip along the game, right? To where they're playing along, you give them something new, then they continue to play, you give them something new, right? And almost like that pacing to give them a reward or give them a collectible, give them something new as they continue to play, right? As well as challenge them on things they've already learned, right? So you can see, in level 7, we're being, challenged with some of the interactions that we've already learned before previously in a harder way, right? So the jumping becomes much more precise, or the timing of things becomes much more precise, and continuing on that way. And then lastly, why this is really awesome and really helpful is you can actually start to build and visualize what the levels look like with a chart like this, right? So again, we're all working on a team, and we have different people working on different levels, right? So if we're working on, say, I'm tasked with working on level 5, right? I have to build level 5, 6, and 7, right? Those are my levels that have been assigned to me, right? So in level 5, we now know everything that that level has to include, right? So it has to be a mastery of moving and jumping, practicing interacting with the environment, a mastery of pressure pads and doors and gates, practicing lever and springboard, and introducing the crusher for the first time. So everything that we just mentioned would be included in level 5, right? And you can see, oops, I apologize. Everything you can see here that's included vertically is everything that will be included in that level, right? So it's a really good way to divvy out the tasks of the actual, building of the levels and making sure that everyone is following and, making sure that level 10 isn't harder than, level 15 and things like that, and having that progression building off of one another. So just a little bit of insight. Again, this isn't anything you're going to be building or anything you're responsible for. You're just going to be making two mechanics over one level or one part of the level. So just know that this is something that you can start to design as you go forward into building larger games and larger projects that have multiple levels and several mechanics that the player's learning over time. So definitely a really good example of an IPM chart on a larger scale. Alrighty, and then getting into the minor setups. All right, so we've gone over the player goal, the featured asset, and then the major mechanics. So then the very last section is going to be the minor setups. All right, so the minor setups are just using those core mechanics to come up with at least 15 small interactions that will keep the player engaged or keep them active in the level. Right, so the key word there is the core mechanics. So this is where you can use just the grab null and jumping and moving and crouching and collecting items as your setups, right? As just the things provided to you, you're going to create interactions with those, right? So as some examples down here, there's just a large toxic spill in the player's path. You pick up objects, you pick up these pallets with the grab null and place them in the toxic spill to create a stepping stone path and then jump across the pallets to reach the other side. Right? All you're using there is a damage volume, the grab null, and jumping. Right? Everything else, all of that is provided to you. You're just going to be building with it. But these should just be small modular interactions that take place in your level. Right? You'll notice that it says 15, right? And then you'll notice on the LDD they're numbered 1 through 15. But that isn't the order that they happen in. Think of them as small modular setups that you can then place and organize in any order that you want to. All right, another example. So the player, this is one from before that we saw in the brainstorming. So the player has to interact with the solar panel and move it so it's positioning pointing towards the deadly laser. And then that powers on the door, allowing the player access to that area. All right, and a third example, we can use the grab null to slide out a broken piece of a catwalk. And then the player can jump, extend on that broken piece of catwalk and jump over a gap and reach the other side and grab a collectible. So these are just small interactions that you can fill your level with. So what we want to avoid in the level when we're actually playing the 3D game is that we're just going to hold down W and then move the mouse back and forth to just walk through the area. You want to force the player to jump, force the player to crouch, force them to use the grab null at certain points, and don't just allow them to just walk through the area to walk to the next interaction. Right? These will be really helpful to where if you have like a hallway or you have an area to where you have a really interesting setup on one side of the room and a really interesting setup on the other side of the room, but just an empty space in between. The whole goal of your minor setups is you can create all 15 of these and place any single one of them in that area, and it will fill up the progression from one side to the next. Also, something you might hear me say a few times this month is the 10-second rule, right? To where we don't ever want the player to be walking more than 10 seconds without any other input. So these minor setups of just, there's an object in the way, pick it up with the grab null and move it, right? Just giving the player something to do to force some interaction at least every 10 seconds along the way. Alrighty, and then lastly, we're just going to talk about literal key and lock setups. So we want to avoid these altogether in scraps, right? And you're probably wondering yourself, well, why not? How come I can't have keys in my level? Why can't I just include, colored keys to open certain doors, right? It's like all my life I've been putting the blue key into the blue door and the red key into the red door, but now you're telling me I can't do it in scraps. How come? Well, first of all, it's going to be difficult to find, right? So scraps is set in a modern, realistic setting. So, the assets that we're using are having, a realistic theming to them. So a key would have to be very, very small, right? Like the size they are in real life, which would make them difficult to see in the level, right? Or difficult to actually locate. To make them easy to find, you'd have to make it very large or, very cartoonish to actually catch the player's attention. So that's one reason why. The next reason why is, just like I said, it's been done so many times before. It's a worn out trope, right? It's been done so many times that it's no longer an original idea, right? It's not creative in any way. I mean, maybe the ways that you obtain the keys, that is going to be the creative part, but the fact that it's an actual key going into a door has been done so many times. So I push everybody to come up with something a bit more creative than that. Also, it's an everyday task. I can tell you when I lose my keys and I have to go find them in my house somewhere, it's not necessarily fun, right? So you have the opportunity inside of a video game to do things that you can't do in everyday life, right? So try and push yourself to come up with something that's creative and memorable and not just another task that you'd have to do in everyday life. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well now he's telling me I can't do any literal keys and any like literal locks, so what can I do in place of it? Right? So if some things you might be thinking of right out of the box would be these right here, right? Okay, I can't do keys, so I'm going to do a key card. Right? Or I can't do keys, so I'm going to do a crowbar. Now when I collect the crowbar, every door is quote unquote unlocked because I can just walk up to it and press E and the door opens, right? So this is the same. This is a very similar issue as the literal key and locks, and this goes back to just selecting the first item or selecting the first solution that you come up with, right? So you can't do keys, so you just pick key cards, and then you stop from that point. But I encourage you to push yourself even further and try and do something that's immersive or interesting and can lead to a memorable experience or an interesting setup in the level, right? Some examples of that would be like dynamite, all right? So the dynamite, you could have a setup in the level where the player needs to go find a stick of dynamite, a roll of duct tape, and a clock. And when they find all three of those items, they can combine it together and make a bomb, right? And then they can go place this bomb in front of, I don't know, in front of a debris pile, right? And then it can explode, right? So you hear a sound effect, you see the debris flying everywhere. There's a particle effect. There's a really awesome event that happens, and then the dust settles and there's a pathway for the player to lead through, right? Same tech in terms of the key, right? Once the bomb was assembled, that was our key, right? And then the debris pile was our door, right? But visually and in terms of immersion, it's much better and keeps the player interested and a much better experience than just opening up a door with a key. And as a last alternative, I've seen this done a few times. I always get a kick out of it. So any type of like body part. I had a student. There was a dead scientist, and there was the only way to get into his lab was a retina scanner. So you had to go track down the dead scientist, and then take his head with the grav null and carry it over to the retina scanner and hold it in front of the door, and then the door opened, and you could get the documents out of his lab. So same thing, right? It could have been a key, whether it's a key or a head, right? Basically, if the object is there, open the door, or if they have this item, open the door, it's the same tech, right? It's just visually it's different, and it's a little bit more interesting and creative than just find the key, open the door. So think of different things you can collect or obtain to allow access, and also try and push yourself to come up with things like I mentioned with the debris pile, other ways to enter rooms or areas than just walking through a door, right? Blowing a hole in the wall, breaking in through the ceiling, coming up through the floor, different things like that to actually enter and exit than just opening and closing doors.